There's a brand new law in California. Now, I know that may be hard to believe, but this particular law affects the ability for landlords to raise the price of their rent and to control their property. Now, whether you live in California or not, whether you invest in California or not, this new wide-ranging rule against landlords affects you. I'm going to give you my perspective on this particular rule. I'm going to tell you the wide-ranging effects I believe it's going to have and give you an alternative. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson. Learn more about what Nomad Capitalist does at nomadcapitalist.com. Let's talk about California's brand new rent control law. This just came into effect recently. It's called AB 1482. And it should come as no surprise that there's another new law that is anti-business, anti-investor in California. I remember reading in Jerry Brown's final year as governor recently, he signed over 1,000 new laws into force. Many of them against business owners, against investors, against anyone with wealth. California's taxes, of course, are the highest in the country. This is not a place to be, and yet somehow 38 million people, including some very wealthy people, still live there and still keep their money there. Let's talk about this particular law. What does it do? Two things. The first thing this new rent control law does is say if you're a landlord, you can only raise the price of your rent by 5% a year, plus the consumer price index, so about another 2.5–3% every year. That's the most you can raise it. And so while there were certainly places in California that had this rent control, now it's statewide. And what's always interesting to me, having lived in Arizona for a while, kind of the next state over, and I would often drive to California, when you cross over from Arizona to California, you say to yourself, why wouldn't you live in this ugly stretch of sand over here in Arizona where the taxes are lower and the regulations are almost non-existent, rather than this stretch of sand in California where you pay through the nose. California is not just Los Angeles and beaches and bikinis. Okay? There are parts of California that are just normal places. And so now everyone's affected. Even in the more pro-business parts of the state, you're covered because you're part of the same state with these kooks over on the coast. So number one, you can't raise the rent. Number two, if you want to remove a tenant who's been there for more than a year, you have to demonstrate just cause. Now, that doesn't sound so bad, right? These laws passed because people like the idea of taking care of tenants. I don't want to throw someone out in the street, but I remember growing up as a kid, my father had a friend who owned like an 800-unit apartment building. And he said, whenever we go to housing court, just forget it, write it off. You're going to lose every time as the landlord. Just, write it off. Just let the guy move in and camp out because you are going to lose as the landlord. And so I learned very early on, that's how a lot of these systems work. They say just cause, but when it comes to actually implement it, what is just cause? It's up to the interpretation of whomever it is enforcing it, and generally, if you're a landlord, that means it's against you. Now, here's a case that I came across. I heard about a case where someone had a tenant that he liked. Nice guy, the tenant was a nice guy, the landlord wanted to be nice, he never raised the rent for 4 or 5 years. Now he saw this new law coming out and said, well shoot, I'm charging this guy way under market rent because I've been a nice guy, he was a nice tenant, let's just get along. And now he can only raise the rent 5% a year. He can't go to the market rent now that he's been letting the guy not pay for all those years. He can only add 5% a year plus the CPI. And so now he's going to always be below market rent, even when the guy leaves. And so what does this mean? Well, we've of course talked for many years about how California is probably the worst place to start an LLC, the worst place to start a business, the worst place to hire. There's other new laws about that we won't even get into. Just the worst place for a lot of. Oh, by the way, the tax department is it's the KGB cowers around the franchise tax board. These people aren't messing around. And so why anyone is investing or doing business in California is quite frankly beyond me. But this law takes it to a whole new level where if you own a property, your tenants have all the rights, they can be doing whatever they want, you cannot raise the rent. And so what does that mean? Well, of course it has an unintended consequence of landlords are going to leave. They're going to go and buy property somewhere else where it's better. And so what we're saying, let me just posit this. Let me posit that you don't go and you sell your property in California and go and buy property in Arizona instead. Let me posit that you take a totally different approach And while California is the most aggressive in the United States, that is the general direction that the United States is moving. And the same is true, I think, in other Western Anglo countries. The trend is generally becoming more and more anti-wealth, anti-landlord, anti-investor, and more pro-tenant and all that. Why don't you take your money, sell your property in California, the market's overheated anyway, and go and put your money in an emerging or frontier market where the regulations are practically non-existent, the tax rates are low, the government welcomes you with open arms, and maybe you can even take that money and get a second residence permit for a place to live, a second citizenship that gives you citizenship insurance. There are markets. I mean, for example, we recently had we had 2 real estate master classes in Tbilisi, Georgia. I showed people around, introduced them to all my contacts that I've made over the years, showed them some properties, and people are making good money right now doing Airbnb. That's another thing a lot of these Western economies have just basically banned is you can't do Airbnb, you can't raise your yields. So they've banned Airbnb in many places, and now they're putting rent control on the long-term rental market. You're like a rat with nowhere to go. So anyway, people came to Tbilisi, Georgia, in the country of Georgia, and they said, well, 5% income tax, that's phenomenal. Airbnb yields are good. The properties are dirt cheap. What if the government turns and starts to regulate this? Now, there are a few more regulations in Georgia recently. They raised cigarette prices, which were like 70 cents a pack. Now it's like $2. The EU pushed that. The EU pushed them to come and get these eco-friendly buses. But what they're not being pushed on, what they don't really want to regulate is things like Airbnb. Why? Because they want people to come and buy real estate. They're the opposite of California, and there are many countries like that. There are many places like that where Airbnb is allowed. You can do whatever you want. One thing that we actually talked about, one of the guys asked, he said, well, what if I want to remove a tenant later? The agent said, you must give 1 month's notice that you need the property for your own use, and then the tenant needs to go. It's so informal there. I mean, it's almost probably too informal, but it's so informal. People just pay their rent. You have a basic contract, and if you need them to move out, you give them 1 month. If they want to move out after their contract, they give you 1 month. And there's none of the endless regulations that make investing in many places in the West so difficult. Prices are lower, $1,000 a meter and up. $1,500 a meter gets you a pretty nice place. That's like 1/15 the price of a market like Los Angeles. And you're in the city center. Yields are higher, taxes are lower, regulations are practically non-existent. And so, for me, this is the antidote. What do we say here? We say, go where you're treated best. Those are the 5 magic words. Go where you're treated best. California hasn't been that for decades. Okay, I was in California 13 years ago. It was terrible then. It's even worse now. The United States in general, and other countries like it, I believe, this is their trend. Just look at it. Now, California, again, they're an innovator in this. They're an innovator in bad anti-business policies. But you've seen a lot of things that have started in California that have kind of become federal law, or other states start to adapt. They start the trend. They're the trendsetters. And so my idea is, if you don't like that, just exit the system entirely. I don't want to spend my life chasing what's the next worst thing, go to Texas or something, and then they have a new law eventually. Just change the game entirely. Go to places where your money is welcome. Go to places where your money is free to act as it wishes. Go to places where they want investors rather than pushing you away. As I say, every country is a brand, and California is certainly a brand. This is like the ultimate brand. I mean, everyone wants to go to California, and when they get there, this is terrible, actually. And so, why don't you go to a country that doesn't have a brand? Because the countries that have the brands, they use the brand, and they use it against you. And they say, oh, it's like the hot girl on the beach. Oh yeah? Oh, you want to invest in California? All right, you can do it our way. Here's what you're going to do. Get a pen, write this down. Meanwhile, you go to other places that just hey, welcome, please, come right in. What can we do for you? Right? I had a friend who moved from California to Nevada, and she said when she set up her business in Nevada, and the local county officials called her and said, thank you for moving your business here. That doesn't happen in California. It does happen in other places. And so that is my response. When a place says, we don't want your money anymore, you go to a place that does. And my theory is, don't fall into the trends of countries that are becoming more socialistic. Go to the places where your money can be treated best. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number one, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number two, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number three, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number four, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.